So our speaker tonight is, in keeping with my philosophy here the last few months since we haven't been able to meet in person, I've been trying to get speakers from across the country that, we can't just, it's just too difficult, impossible, expensive for us to bring them into Fullerton and put them up in a nice hotel and move them back and forth to the airport and all that. So I've been kind of reaching out and spreading my wings a little bit, if you will, and getting speakers from across the country. And so tonight is again one of those. And I don't know that we actually met, Catherine and I, up close and personal, but when I first met her, a couple of you know that about a year and a half ago, I was speaking at some of the AOPA regional gatherings, and I spoke at the Tullahoma, Tennessee gathering. Did about a 3-hour workshop on ForeFlight. And so I was after Catherine's slot, and I went in and I sat in on the last half hour or 40 minutes of her presentation. And it was one of those where almost instantaneously when I sat down, I realized, oh man, I should have been here 2 hours ago because this was amazing. I learned more in the last 5 minutes, and this would have been really good. So then I think it was that year, maybe it was the year before, that Catherine was awarded the 2018 FAA Safety Representative of the Year. Awesome. Good job. Congratulations, Catherine. This last year, she was named the National Flight Instructor, CFI of the Year, the FAA CFI of the Year. And that is an incredibly prestigious thing. She does a ton of stuff. You've probably seen her stuff in AOPA Pilot Magazine. You've probably seen her, heard her on Max Trescott's, one of Max Trescott's podcasts. We had him a few months ago as a speaker. She's all over the place. She's incredibly brilliant, does an amazing job talking about aerodynamics in little airplanes and making it so clear what's going on. So, Catherine, you have the floor. Take it away.
All right. Thank you so much. And let me see if I can go ahead and share my screen. So let's see. All right.
Yep, you got it. Perfect.
Okay, so I have to say that this presentation came together in kind of a funny way. Mike and I played a bit of email tag and such. And so we set this date for me to be here sharing some aviation stuff with you. And so I don't know if he realizes this, but he wrote me, and I wasn't sure if we had settled on exactly the topic, but he sent me a title that said Aerodynamics in Plain Sight. And I thought, hey, that's cool. So what I ended up doing is thinking, okay, what do I want to talk about that would make sense with this title? So, usually the title comes, last, but in this case, it came first, and I really liked the title. I am a mathematician, and I teach at the University of the South. That's my full-time job, and I teach aerobatics, and like Mike said, I write for AOPA Pilot Magazine. And I am in my happy place when, my geeky math side gets in contact with my, thrill, adrenaline seeking, pilot side. And I just love mixing math and aviation. But I'm a very visual kinds of person. So I loved the title of this, Aerodynamics in Plain Sight. I love videos that help make aerodynamics accessible and interesting, and I hope you'll agree. So I've built this around some of my favorite videos. So it's kind of like watching my home videos. All right, so, and by the way, let me just a little housekeeping. I think I like to make this more of a conversation. So I would love it if you all ask questions. I'm not sure how that's going to work, if putting in the chat makes sense, or if you just want to raise your hand. I think I can only see a few people on the side of my screen at a time. So I might not be able to see you, but I think Mike is going to be helping to monitor that. So if you have a question, just have at it. So,
yeah, I thought I would do that. I'll just keep an eye on that. And if there's, when you get to a good breaking point, Catherine, I'll bust in and rain on your parade with a question. And I did forget to mention, if you want Wings credit for this, stand by toward the end of the talk. I'll put up a couple of screens with instructions on what you need to do to get Wings credit.
All right, cool. Yeah, and again, I love to be interrupted. So, you know, interrupt away. I love to make this a conversation. All right, so as I said, I'm a math professor. That's my full-time job. My fun job is teaching pilots how to get out of trouble, or better yet, stay out of trouble to begin with. And my partner in that endeavor is my Cessna Aerobat Wilbur. And, you know, he wasn't optimized for aerobatics, but to me, he's perfect because, you know, as an aerobatic performer, you know, he's got long wings. He's got the same underpowered engine that every other 152 rolled off the line with. He's got a yoke instead of a stick. He does not have inverted systems. So if you try to maintain inverted flight, it does not last long in this airplane. So, but for all of those reasons that might mean he's suboptimal as an aerobatic performer, it means he's perfect for what I do. Because, you know, if you were to get into trouble in your 182 or your Bonanza or, you know, another airplane like that, it's not going to act like a Pitts. It's going to act like this airplane right here. So, doing aerobatics in him is all about energy management, and he's got some great characteristics, some great spin characteristics. So he's my baby, and I just think he's fabulous. So I just thought I'd show something kind of funny. He's a 1979 Cessna Aerobat, and I love those old brochures from the Cessna company. And this is one of my favorites. So this is Wilbur's, you know, brochure. And one of my favorite quotations ever from one of these is from a flight instructor who, and here's his quotation. He says he's sometimes in the air with students for 9 hours a day. That's why he likes to teach in the comfort of a 152, which these days, you know, in 2021, we don't really think of the 152 as the comfortable airplane. But back then it was, apparently, and which the 9 hours a day, clearly those regulations have changed in the interim. My second favorite quotation is the only one from a woman in this brochure. And it is, you know, she can't believe how like simple it is to fly. And I'm, as a woman myself, and I'm sure the women in the audience will agree with me, that I'm just so grateful that, you know, Cessna put out something that even I could fly. So, but no, he's a great airplane, and I love him. All right, so what I ended up doing for this, as I said, I organized this around some of my favorite aviation videos, and I'm referencing 3 of my articles that I've done for Pilot Magazine. I'm a monthly contributor, and so you can always find mine in the proficiency efficiency section. And yeah, I'm going to highlight 3 of those articles. So, all right. Here is one of my favorite videos that shows, besides money, what makes airplanes fly. And the lift created by the wing is due to the differential velocity across the top and the bottom of the wing. And what I love about this video, the smoke tunnel video, is you'll see that if you have 2 molecules that hit the leading edge, and one goes above and one goes below, my old pilot books said that, well, in order for them to meet up again at the back, the one on top has to travel farther, and therefore it travels faster. And that's just false, right? So you'll see that those 2 molecules will never meet each other again, because the one that goes on the top goes way faster than it needs to meet up with the one that went below. I like the video too, because if you just look at that trailing edge on the top, you'll see that the flow just starts to separate. And you'll never get away from that, but you can minimize it by having a pointed trailing edge to our wing. And that's exactly why our wings have pointed trailing edges. So here's an interesting video that shows you what happens potentially when you don't have a pointed trailing edge.
And there it is.
Oops, I guess I didn't.
Now look at this.
All right, I'll say who that is in a sec.
Fascinating. This regular motion of a generation of large vortices.
Okay, so I thought I had muted that, but that's Alexander Lippisch, who was a scientist that came over after World War II as part of Operation Paperclip, the same group that brought over Wernher von Braun. So he came over and worked
sound on this thing.
Pardon? Oh, anyway, so he worked for the Collins Foundation and made some videos. This is one where you see a cylinder. So you see a blunt object. And what you're seeing are alternating vortices coming off the back. And this is exactly what can happen when your object does not have a pointed trailing edge. And so this is why our wings do have pointed trailing edges. You can imagine it takes a lot of energy to create those sorts of, they're called von Karman streets, and they're these oscillating vortices. And so that's an enormous source of drag. But I love that video because I think it's really pretty. But by the way, if you fly an old airplane that has the wires, you know, they used to say that those wires would sing. That's exactly what was happening. There are Karman streets coming off the back of those, and it's an incredible source of drag. All right, so there's one equation in here, and
Catherine.
Yeah. Oh,
Catherine,
sorry.
that's why on the Ford Taurus's antenna, that's a cylinder. Yeah. They wrap it with wire, as you see on cylinders at refineries. You know, so it doesn't blow the refinery stack down, right? So FYI.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and you know, if you had my first car was a Ford Mustang. By the way, I grew up in California, so I had a 68 Mustang out there, and it had one of those old round antennas, and you know that thing would kind of go wild. But you're absolutely right about sorry, your example was the antennas and smokestacks.
On the Taurus, and then smokestacks, you know, yeah. They're like 10, 20 feet wide, but they go up, you know, 120 feet, and you just don't want the wind blowing them over. So cut the drag on it by wrapping it with, you know, a helical, you know, wrap of something wide and big to defeat that street.
Yeah, yeah. So really interesting. Or if you're ever driving on the freeway and you get behind a like a truck that has a blunt edge at the back, and do you ever go like sway back and forth? That's what you're feeling. You're feeling the streets, the Karman streets coming off the back of the truck. Anyway, big source of drag, and it's nicer when those you know, we don't have those round objects. So, all right, so here is, there's only one equation here, and this is one of my favorites because it shows you really what matters. The lift created by an airplane is a factor of a few different things. First of all, air density. So whenever you have higher air density, so colder day, higher altimeter setting, lower to sea level or closer to sea level, you have greater air density, and so you get more lift. If you've flown January versus July, that's very obvious. Wing area has an effect on lift. So, you know, the more wing area, the more lift you're going to get, although you're also going to pick up drag that way. So that's why you don't see airplanes that have incredibly, you know, bizarrely large wings. But if you're flying on a certain day, a pilot can't really do much about the air density, and unless you're shedding wing parts, you're not going to do anything about the wing area either. So those are pretty much a constant. But velocity has a profound effect on lift. And the fact that that is squared means that when you double your velocity, you quadruple your lift. Or said a different way, if you cut your velocity in half, you cut your lift in a quarter. So that really shows you the extent to which velocity impacts lift, as does coefficient of lift, which you can think of as just angle of attack. So as your angle of attack goes up, your coefficient of lift goes up until you get to that critical angle of attack, and then it drops off pretty precipitously after that. All right, so if our wings could somehow be infinitely long, we wouldn't pick up this kind of drag, but you have that higher pressure air downstairs, and it's going to seek that low pressure environment upstairs. So around the wingtips, you have this curling action. And those are called wingtip vortices, as we all know. And you can think of that as an inefficiency. It's the inefficiency that occurs because your wings come to an end. And what it does is it causes some downwash. So it's partly responsible for the fact that your airplane is in essence always flying uphill, so to speak. So you can't get away from that, but you can try to minimize it by having, say, long, slender wings, high aspect ratio wings like gliders have. All right, so they are, that's called lift-induced drag. It's the drag that you incur because your wings are lifting and they come to an end. And I like this smoke tunnel video too, because you can see that as you raise the angle of attack of the wing, that vortex action around the wingtip becomes stronger. So as you raise the angle of attack, in some sense, your wing becomes less efficient because you have a greater pressure differential. If you think back to that lift equation, you can get your lift in a number of different ways. One way is to go fast, right? So if you go fast, you have, you can get away with having less wing area and such. So they're all trade-offs. All right, so not only do wingtip vortices cause a problem for us, given that it makes our flight less efficient, of course, they cause problems for other aircraft as well. There's an advisory circular 9023G that is out and has lots of advice. So it says that the vortices start when the aircraft rotates and they continue until the aircraft touches down. I'll get to that in a sec, but that's actually not true, but that's what the advisory circular says. And it has all of these diagrams that show, you know, if the airplane touches down here, well, then this is a safe zone for you to touch down. And if the airplane rotates here, then you should be okay in this region, but not okay in this other region. And it has all of these diagrams like this, but, you know, it would be so cool if they were actually read like that. And of course, they're not. The insidious part about wingtip vortices is that you can't see them. And of course, their placement would be highly sensitive to wind effects, among other effects. And I just think if you're trying to imagine where these are to try to safely operate your aircraft, that's kind of not the way to go. There is some good advice in 9023G that I think is helpful. You should know that after ATC says caution wake turbulence, they generally do not provide any further wake turbulence avoidance information to the pilot. So also, a pilot is responsible for his or her own wake turbulence avoidance after accepting any traffic information, instructions to follow another aircraft, or a visual approach clearance. So you should know that you're on your own and they're not necessarily going to give you any more information on avoiding wingtip vortices. So it also discusses that wingtip vortices are strongest for an aircraft that's heavy. And that makes sense because if you have more weight, you're going to have to generate more lift, and other things being equal, probably means you're flying at a higher angle of attack to achieve that lift. So when you have that higher angle of attack, higher pressure differential, vortices become stronger. Also, when you're flying slowly, since you're typically at a high angle of attack doing that. Now, for clean or dirty, a lot of times I'll ask the question that are vortices worst when you're clean or when the aircraft is dirty? And I don't know if there's any way to do a poll on the fly, but I will say that
we have a yes, no button. If you can open your participants window, you probably have a yes or no button. You might be able to click, and speaking to all the attendees here. So if you think the airplane generates a stronger vortex if it's clean, click yes. And if you think it generates a stronger vortex when it's dirty, click no. And let's see what we can see here. And while I've got you here, Catherine, there was a point made in the chat about that lift-induced drag is really because the lift vector generated by the wing is not vertical, but is tilted aft.
Yep, that's another way. Yep.
Is it kind of another way of saying the same thing?
It is. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that completely. Yeah. In fact, usually I have a slide that has both of those, but that's true. You can think of it that way as well.
And I'm seeing about not a whole lot of answers, but I see 4 that say it's stronger for a clean aircraft and 1 that says for a dirty aircraft and 1 that's a blue go faster button. So I don't know what that one means.
Okay. So I will say this, a lot of times that's the one that I think there's the most confusion on. And I think the reason is because nobody's ever been given a really good reason for that. I'm here to give you that good reason for it. The answer is clean. And the reason is the following. Whenever there is a discontinuity in your plan form, in other words, when your flaps are down, and I didn't draw it in this picture, but when this Cessna's flaps are down, there is another opportunity for some of that high pressure air downstairs to leak upstairs. So when the flaps are down, you have 4 vortices. But when the flaps go up, you lose the ones on the middle and the outer ones become stronger. So that's the reason that clean is worse, because you have 2 stronger vortices compared with 4 weaker ones. So, and of course, I'm not going to leave anybody just with a diagram. So what I did in this video is I took Wilbur. Wilbur's my aerobat, and I put cones and strings on the edges of the flaps and the edges of the wingtip so that you could see where the vortex action is. And this is my home airport, by the way, in Sewanee, Tennessee. And I will say that it was a bit of a gusty day. So what I'm going to do is, okay, let me back up. This video shows 2 things. First of all, it shows that the vortices start on the takeoff roll, not when we rotate. And the second thing it does is you'll see the 4 vortices. And when I put the flaps up after takeoff, you'll see that the middle ones go away and the outer ones become stronger. However, it was a bit of a gusty day in Sewanee. And so every time I give an aileron deflection, you're going to get just a little bit of a vortex action. So with that, here's the video.
So we ended up with about an 8-to-1. It looks like eight
Okay.
people said the green yes. I think that was the clean.
Okay.
Which one was the first one? I forget which.
Oh yeah, my point, I'm going to stop this for a second. My point was that it's not a resounding, like usually everybody says heavy, everybody says slow, but then there's a little bit of a, unknown about clean or dirty. And if you read the manuals on it, you're really not given a very good reason. So Anyway, here's the takeoff roll. Then I want you to notice that the vortices start while the plane is still on the ground. Well, actually, I'll talk you through it. So here's the start of the takeoff roll. Okay, so you can see that the vortices are starting now. The plane is still on the ground. Still on the ground. Okay, I just lifted off. And at a certain point up here, I am going to put the flaps up. Okay, so the flaps go up, and I'm hoping that you can see largely the inside ones go away. But again, every time I'm getting a little bit of an aileron deflection, you're picking up a little bit of a vortex. But so that's what I wanted to show with that one. And I see a hand raised. Is that somebody who wants to ask a question? Or
Yes, I got a question here.
Yes.
I understand how when you have the flaps down, that essentially it's dividing up the vortices amongst the different locations. Therefore, it's going to be weaker per location as opposed to being concentrated at the wingtips. But here's my other question from the opposing point of view, because a lot of aircraft, for example, the Boeing 757 is known for having nasty vortices in the dirty configuration versus the clean configuration. So, so my question is that does angle of attack play a factor? In other words, usually when you're in a dirty configuration, usually you are at a higher angle of attack in order to generate the greater amount of lifting force required or coefficient of lift required in order to compensate for the slower airspeed you're at. And can that generate more vortices? How does that compare to having the flaps clean versus down in terms of the vortex strength?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, life is not always that simple, right? So if you putting the flaps down, but now you are you're flying at a higher angle of attack. So whenever you have that higher pressure differential, you're going to get stronger vortices. So I agree with that, that it's not that simple, right? So I agree that if you change something else, I guess what I'm saying is all other things equal, clean is worse. But I agree with you that there could be reasons why it could be worse in a dirty configuration if you're making all four of them stronger. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
My whole idea was that oftentimes when you're dirty configuration, you are increasing your coefficient of lift via the angle of attack, and that's what's increasing the vortices as a whole, all of them.
Yeah, you're bringing up a great point, right? So when you put flaps down, one thing it's doing is it does raise your coefficient of lift. However, you stall at a lower angle of attack. So the whole CL versus alpha curve shifts to the left, so to speak. So I guess it's not clear to me what your angle of attack is. I mean, I guess you'd have to have a way to measure that. But do you see what I'm saying? That yes, your coefficient of lift is higher, your angle of attack might be lower. So it's not clear.
Yes, the flaps allow you to fly at a lower angle of attack because the way it shifts the curve. It's just in general when you're dirty, because you're slower, generally you do fly at a higher angle of attack is what I've found, but the flaps do allow you to fly at a lower AOA.
Right. So yeah, again, it's complicated. Yeah.
If you ask the in and out family that came in and crashed behind the 757 at Orange County, you would say dirty configuration.
Mm.
Right, killed the family off in West Wind or so following the 757. That's what started all this separation, and Mike could talk to that more too.
And let me just say, at a certain point, this is an academic thing, right? The fact is, vortices are nasty. Whether the plane is clean, it doesn't mean that by making the plane dirty, it somehow makes them benign. That is far from the truth. And one thing that, I think people have they have this idea that it has to be this really big plane to cause crazy wake turbulence. And that's just not true at all. For instance, when I added glider privileges to my commercial certificate, one thing they have you do is they have you box the wake of the towing aircraft, and you'll get a big jolt from a Pawnee. So, you know, if you think that, you know, I think too often we get the message that it has to be some big aircraft to put out vortices that could be problems for others. And that's not true at all. And so I'm not, believe me, I'm not at all saying that if the aircraft is dirty, they're somehow more benign. Truthfully, that's just more of an academic thing. I'm just addressing the claim that's made in 9023G. So. And to that point, my next video is actually a Black Hawk, and the vortex, you know, helicopters put out vortices that are very similar to the vortices that are put out but behind just fixed wing aircraft. And I don't know if you've seen this video before, but if you haven't, here is this low pass from the, or maybe it's takeoff, I'm not sure, from the Black Hawk. And you'll see in, I don't know, another 10, 15 seconds, you'll see a cirrus come from the left part of the screen. And just look at the time that's gone by. Okay, so here's the cirrus, gets caught in the wake turbulence, and basically does a cartwheel. I like the video because it shows that, but you'll see very soon another reason why I like this video. The fellow survived. You'll see him get out in just a sec and walk out of the airplane. So, but as you know, it sounds like you all have a painful reminder that's very nearby that these things are fatal and they're very dangerous.
This is probably about the part where the pilot looks around and says, "What in the heck was that?"
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, the thing is, you know, I've being facetious and made a joke about them, you know, being invisible. And yeah, they are invisible. So, you know, I personally think that trying to wonder where these things are as a way to try to avoid them is not the best way to go. The best way to go is just to look at your watch and wait a couple of minutes. And if the air is particularly calm, maybe wait closer to 3 between operations. So if I'm cleared to land at a large airport, I just take a look at my watch when I see the other airplane cross the threshold, and I make sure I sort of time so that I'm not right up against that.
To that point, 40 years ago, Philadelphia International DC-9 came in 3 minutes later. A twin engine rolled and crashed upside down just short of the threshold 3 minutes after DC-9 landed.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. But I really do think that time is probably the only way to try to avoid them, is just to give them time to settle.
We had somebody asking, do you know, actually it was Jim Gandy there, was that a downwind landing that the Cirrus was doing? He says it looked like the dust blew the same direction the Cirrus was going. I don't know if that's just the momentum, the inertia of the dust it was hitting, or if it was the wind that was blowing it.
Yeah, that I don't know.
You know, see if there's a windsock or anything else going on there.
Yeah, I don't see one. All right. Okay, so this was part of a piece that I did December 2018 called In the Vortex. So if you get a chance to check out that article, I always love feedback. So, and any questions on anything before I move along? All right. Okay, so let's get back to, we talked about what makes an aircraft fly. Sometimes they don't fly as well as we like them to. So a stall happens when you have that airflow that is hopefully mostly attached at lower angles of attack. But what happens is as you raise the angle of attack, you'll get a separation bubble that goes from the trailing edge and it moves forward along the wing. So if you actually had some tufting in there, it would be moving the opposite direction. And as you raise the angle of attack more, that separation bubble moves forward even more. And when it envelops enough of the wing, that's when we say the wing stalls. And of course, the lift drops off precipitously after that. I'm going to try to turn up my brightness here. All right, so here's a wing that is at some angle of attack, and it looks like the flow detaches, I don't know, about 2/3 of the way back. But this will show you that as you raise the angle of attack even more, that separation bubble marches forward, and like I say, the wing stalls. The good news about a stall is if you don't like it, just lower the angle of attack and that flow reattaches nicely.
We did have a question in here about do dogfighting pilots receive training on vortices?
Yeah, you know, that I think that would be excellent. I don't know.
I could actually speak to that.
Yeah.
The FA-18 Hornet was derived from the F-5, and Northrop created what are known as vortex control technology. And the whole reason why the F-18 has a Cobra-like hood towards the front of the wing, that's known as the leading edge extension or leading edge root extension.
Yeah.
And the purpose of that is it's a delta wing, and it is known that delta wings do not stall. They create a vortex. And so that is exactly, they use that facet, that capability to fly at insanely and obscenely slow speeds, because in a dogfight, it's not about how fast you fly, it's about how slow you can go in order to turn inside of a bandit and get a guns kill. And so that's one of the things. There's actually a story of an F-16 versus an F-18. They were doing what's called a flat scissors. It degenerated into a flat scissors type fight from a rolling scissors, and accelerator, brake, accelerate type fight. And ultimately, they both were at minimum speed. Both aircraft were coming down like a rock, and beam each other. And the Hornet, to the astonishment of the Viper driver, stomped his left rudder pedal, points his nose at the guy, and takes a shot. And the only reason he was able to do that was because of the vortex capability of the F-18 that the F-16 does not have to the same extent.
Yeah. Actually, thinking back to that lift equation, that where lift is a function of velocity squared, so is turn radius. So if you cut your velocity in half, you cut your turn radius in a quarter. So if you want a nice tight turn, you do it at a really low airspeed. So yeah, if they can achieve a really low airspeed, then that's going to make them more maneuverable.
The other thing is that with the F-18, that the main wing can be fully stalled and the leading edge root extension is still generating lift via the vortex. So that's the other thing. So it prevents it from stalling.
Interesting.
And that's, but your last point about turn radius and speed starts to touch on the difference between a canyon turn and a chandelle. The chandelle, your speed is a lot higher throughout the first part of the maneuver, especially, but a canyon turn, you got to slow down first.
Right. So yeah, you've just hit on one of my pet peeves. So I'm also an FAA designated examiner. And I sometimes I'll ask either commercial pilots or maybe flight instructor candidates, why do you do a chandelle? And then they tell me, or this is something that I don't even ask, they'll offer that, yeah, the chandelle is when you're in that canyon situation, you need to hang a U-turn. And I just, it's exasperating, because absolutely not. That is not the use of a canyon turn. And I did do an article on this, I don't know, a few months ago. And what I did is I showed the radius for a general canyon turn versus a chandelle. And I think the way I had it, it was three times. I think it was 3 times the radius, turn radius, as the proper canyon turn, where you are relying on the fact that the airplane, you want to get the airplane to go slowly. So you put your flaps down generally, and you execute a turn that is slow enough to make a nice tight turn, but not so slow to lose control of the aircraft. So yeah, you hit on one of my pet peeves there, that a chandelle is not a canyon turn. So.
Nailed it.
Yeah, someone's getting extra points here. So. All right, so people don't like stalls, usually I think because they think a spin might be around the corner. So I thought I'd talk about spins for a little bit. What is a spin? Aerodynamically, it's an aggravated stall with auto rotation. How did you get there? Well, you stalled the plane and you weren't coordinated. Those are the ingredients. So for the airplane, let's just say the airplane is in horizontal flight. It doesn't have to be, but we'll just set the scenario. Airplane is in horizontal flight and is a high angle of attack. And at the stall, if there's any yaw, for instance, my airplane will initially go over upside down on its back, and then it'll settle into an upright spin. And that corner between what was horizontal flight and what's going to become vertical flight is the incipient phase of the spin. You can think of your airplane as a gyroscope, right? The faster it's spinning, the harder it's going to be to stop, just like a regular gyroscope. And once it has the rotation rate and the rotational energy that it's going to, then you're in the developed phase of the spin where your spin or your flight path is basically vertical. It tends to be easier to recover during the incipient phase than it is in the developed phase one reason is your gyroscope's going faster than it usually does in the incipient phase. So it's going to be harder to stop. And then of course the phase that we want every spin to have is the recovery phase. And that's the one that is it can be counterintuitive because you see a lot of ground. And in order to recover, I'm going to invite you to see even more. So you're going to have to see more ground in order to recover. So here is what a spin can look like. Here's the approach to the stall. And at the stall, I'm going to have a lack of coordination, and you'll see Wilbur goes over on his back, and then he settles into an upright spin. And at this point, he is developed. So, yeah, so here he is. And you'll see in a little bit, you'll see the nose go down, and that flow is going to reattach. And again, in order to recover, you're seeing a lot of ground, but you're going to have to see even more. And I think I recovered right about here. Nose goes down, we get the flow to reattach, and we can fly away and use the plane again. So aerodynamically, what's happening is at that critical angle of attack, of course, both wings have that stall, critical angle of attack. And now if you introduce, a little airplane, now if you introduce yaw into the picture, your outside wing is going more quickly through the air. So it gets more lift, right? Velocity has a big effect on lift. So it goes more quickly through the air. So what happens is it becomes upwardly moving. Your inside wing, which is downwardly moving, has a higher angle of attack. So what happens is your outside wing with a lower angle of attack has more lift and less drag. Your inside wing with that higher angle of attack has less lift and a lot more drag. And that's the imbalance that's going to set up and perpetuate that motion. So here's a video that I did with Wilbur. And this time I put tufts all over his wings. And when the tufts are flat, you'll see that's where the flow is attached. When the flaps or when the strings are dancing, what you're witnessing is that's a part of the wing where the separation bubble is over that part. Let's see. So you can also see that I have strings and cones on the wingtip. And the reason I did that is so that you could tell if a wing is lifting, because if a wing is lifting, it's creating a vortex. So if you don't see a vortex, that wing is not lifting. All right, so here's the spin. And you can see the tufts are all nice. Okay, so if you look at the inside wing, which in this case is the left wing, you'll see that all the tufts are dancing. So that wing is completely stalled, as is evidenced by the fact that there's no vortex. Because again, if a wing is lifting, it's creating a vortex. You're not seeing a vortex on the inside wing. The outside wing is mostly stalled, but there's enough attached flow on that outside wing. You see that there is a vortex, so there's a pressure differential there. So your outside wing in this case is lifting. My inside wing doesn't seem to be doing much of anything, but that's what's perpetuating the motion. Oops, and there was the recovery. So you saw the nose go down. Immediately that flow reattached because I unstalled the wings, and then we could fly away.
I think that's the video I first saw that I thought, wow, that's amazing to see that in action like that. It's beautiful.
I'm glad you like it. Yeah, I have to say, you know, the reason I did that video is, you know, I talked just generally about that in ground school when we do spins and aerobatics. And I had somebody ask, well, exactly what is the angle of attack like on the wing? And I couldn't answer it. And it really bothered me. I couldn't answer it. So that's why I did that. I put the tufting and all of that and got the video. And I had no idea what I would see until I actually, you know, sat down and looked at it. And I thought it was really cool too. And it's funny too, when we talk about angle of attack, you know, different parts of the wing section are actually going to have different angles of attack. So you really can't talk about the angle of attack of a wing. You can talk about the angle of attack of a section of a wing. But I like that video too, because it shows you what's going on at different stations of the wing. But I'm glad you like that too. That's one of my favorites.
So when you put all those tufts and everything on Wilbur, and then you get out to the hangar, does he get excited the same way a dog does when you get the leash out to go for a walk?
Absolutely. Yeah. I tell you, I love my baby and I hope he loves me too. Yeah. We've had a lot of good flying adventures together. So I would like to think that, yeah, I see that tail of his wagging a little bit. Yeah.
In order to break the stall, don't you also have to kick opposite rudder as well as pitch the nose down?
Truthfully, in my airplane, no. So, but it is part of his POH recovery. And I always do that, except when I'm demonstrating to people that you actually don't need any rudder. You can recover from, not only can you recover from a spin in this airplane with neutral rudder, you can recover just fine with pro spin rudder. You don't even have to do anything. But again, I always teach, do what the POH says. And actually, I'm going to bring that up in a minute about the rudder. Hang on to that.
And the important thing there was, she said, in this airplane, not every airplane is the same. 152 is a big baby in spins, but not all airplanes are.
Yeah, what do you mean by big baby?
Well, it recovers so easily.
Yeah, but one of the things that I love about this airplane is he does not self-recover. So people, okay, well, actually, I have a video for that coming up. But you are absolutely right. Spin different platforms, spin differently. In fact, take two of the very same airplane and load them differently, and they're going to spin differently. So, yeah, absolutely. This airplane does not need the rudder, but that's not saying anything about any other platform. Yeah. All right. So when I have a spin aerobatic student, we always do stalls, obviously, and we start sometimes with coordinated stalls. And if you're coordinated, whether you are turning or in level flight, you should not have a tendency for a wing drop. Okay, so coordinated means you're just going to come straight down, so to speak. But once we're done with that, I make sure that we do some uncoordinated stalls. And I know that stalls and spins can seem mysterious about, oh, I get this wing that drops. And one thing I try to share with people is that they are actually very predictable. For example, whenever you are in a slip, what that means is you're giving insufficient rudder to coordinate your turn. So the ball goes to the inside of the turn, and as you know, we should step on the ball, so to speak. And whenever you're in a slip, it's your high wing that has a higher angle of attack. It stalls first, and you are going to roll over the top. That's how that works. When you are in a skid, it's your low wing that has a higher angle of attack. And when you stall in a skid, it's going to go tuck under, it's going to stall first, and you'll go under the bottom, so to speak. So guess what? I've got more videos for this. Here is Wilbur in a slipping stall. I think I even made this slow-mo so you could really witness what was happening. But I am in a slip, and you'll see that the stall progression happens from the high wing across, and his high wing stalls first. All right, so I also have a Bonanza, and this is my Bonanza Nikki, and I put an extra inclinometer because I'm that geeky, so that you see an extra inclinometer over on the right, because it's a little hard to see her inclinometer on the turn coordinator. So I am turning to the left, and you can see that the ball is on the inside of my turn, meaning I'm slipping. And you'll see that when she stalls, as promised, her high wing is going to stall first. All right, and then skidding, as I say, it's the opposite. Here is Wilbur in a skid. And you'll see the low wing stalls first, and he tucks under. And here is the analog in Nikki. You'll see I'm turning to the left, but now the ball is to the right. I'm giving too much rudder to coordinate my turn. And I'll tell you, when she goes, just look how fast she tucks upside down. That's a view that nobody should ever see turning final. Unfortunately, every year somebody sees that turning final. And I don't care how good an aerobatic pilot you are, if you're 300-400 feet above the ground, that is not going to end well. All right. One thing I like to point out is that it's easy to have a wing drop in a stall because it is pretty hard to be exactly coordinated. There are infinitely many ways to slip. There are infinitely many ways to skid, but coordination is the razor thin line that divides those two. So, truthfully, we're probably always either slipping a little bit or skidding a little bit in flight. So that's why it's pretty easy to have a wing drop. And one thing that I share with my students is I think too much is made. I mean, I'm all for good rudder use, but I think too much is made of using the rudder in recovering from a stall. Again, I'm all for good rudder use, but the real antidote is push on the yoke or push on the stick. You get your roll stability back, and you're not going to have a wing that drops anymore. Oh, let me set this up. So to show you what the vertical surface was doing in a spin, I tufted that all up too. And you can think of that vertical stabilizer rudder combination as another wing, right? It's a symmetric airfoil, and it doesn't tend to give lift until you deflect the rudder, and then it gets camber / angle of attack, and it's going to lift for you. So in this airplane, the rudder gets you into the spin, but in order to get you out of the spin, it's got to have some pretty decent flow across it. And here is what that looks like in a spin. Okay, so in this airplane, once I get in the spin, just look at the flow across that vertical surface. So it's not going to be available to me as a lifting surface until I install that. And so in this airplane, like I say, the rudder gets you into it, but the rudder kind of leaves you high and dry in terms of getting out of it. So this, like many general aviation aircraft, is elevator primary for spin recovery. So your elevator is your best bet. Oop, and there was the recovery. And you can see that once we're recovered, we get that good flow back. I didn't include it in here, but I have another video that shows the other side, and the other side of the vertical surface is equally bad in terms of airflow.
I think breaking the stall in a glider might be slightly different though, because I think they try to get you to actually yaw the thing down towards the ground. I mean, if you know your wing is down, your wing just drops right away in a glider, and they try to get you to well, you hit the rudder side, the side of the rudder that's down, you know, it's going towards the ground. That's equivalent to pushing the elevator forward.
Sorry,
and then hit the elevator.
Yeah. Sorry, good.
If you're already in a big bank and you hit bottom rudder toward the ground, that's a little like pushing forward on the elevator if you're in a straight stall.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and gliders are different because they have such huge wings, they have huge aileron authority and not much rudder authority.
Yeah, and so much inertia out there on the wings. I have a little bit of glider time, but I'm not certified. And somebody, Jim did mention, all pilots should spend time in gliders to learn about coordination. And I agree completely. What do you think?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
I'm all for it. I'll tell you, when I got my commercial glider, I was stunned at all of the good things glider pilots learn that we don't learn in the powered community. So I think everybody should go get a glider certificate. You know, when every one of your landings is an engine out, how could that not be the best training ever? So I could go on and on about gliders, but I think getting a glider rating is great.
I just flew a trip with a co-pilot who has a motor glider up in Oregon. And so all the way to Korea and back, I'm getting regaled with tales of glider flying and reminded, okay, I need to get my license.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So I'm going to, I think, go up to the Northeast and do some gliding later this summer. But yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention is that sometimes, and this is really disturbing to me, when I hear that, if I hear flight instructors say that if you get confused in a spin, just take your hands and feet off and they all self-recover. Well, actually, no, they don't. And I find that disturbing for another reason too, because every once in a while, my plane will recover hands off, but you're still pointed at the ground and you're booking there. And so the dangerous part of spins is not that the aircraft is rotating, it's that the ground is hard when you hit it. So, you know, it disturbs me to know that there are people out there saying, oh, just take your hands and feet off and they all self-recover. When again, if you do that in the pattern, it's not going to end well, right? Because you're booking there. So
my dad used to say, it's not the fall that gets you, but that sudden stop at the bottom will.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is a video that I did. It's all the same spin. So I just had 3 cameras and I was on the inside, I was down to my lousy iPhone. So that's why you see the prop. But what I did is I put him into a spin. And when you see my hand go up in the upper right film, that's when I took my hands and feet off the controls. And I powered out, hands and feet off the controls. And then when you see my thumb go up, you'll see me give full opposite rudder. It doesn't even slow the rotation. So here we go. Get all those to go. Yep. Okay, throttle out, hands off, nothing happening. Full opposite rudder, doesn't even slow the rotation. So again, I like to advocate that pilots know how to fly their airplane and take command of it. One of the most powerful things, by the way, that we do with those stalls when I make sure that people are stalling and not being coordinated is the first time I say, just let the plane do what it's going to do. You know, it'll turn upside down. We'll chuckle about it. You know, we'll go back up to altitude. And then the next time, as soon as that roll off starts, I want you to do nothing more than push. And again, I'm all for good rudder use, but as soon as you push on the yoke, any roll off tendency stops. So I just want people to remember pushing is probably it is the most important antidote for stalls and spins. So this was part of an article that I did, I guess it was a couple of years ago for Pilot Magazine called Taming the Stall. So if anybody has any feedback on that, I'm always glad to hear it. And by the way, I featured 4 of Alexander Lippisch's videos. And as I said, he came over from Germany after World War II and did some good work for the United States, ended up with the Collins Foundation and made these videos in the 1950s, mid-1950s, of these smoke tunnel videos. And I just love, like I said, I'm a very visual person, and I love when aerodynamics comes alive and I can actually witness it. So I did this piece to highlight the secret of flight videos there were 13 half-hour episodes, and with a little nudging by yours truly, University of Iowa has put all of them out on YouTube. So it's 6.5 hours, 13 episodes. If you get on YouTube and Google something like maybe Secret of Flight Iowa, you'll pick up the series. I think they are fabulous. And, you know, flight instructors, I think they're great to use to help some of those concepts become, you know, understandable and interesting. I think they're just fascinating. And every time I go through that series, I learn more about those. So I just wanted to highlight that article too. If you get a chance to take a look at that, that would be great. So with that, I want to make sure that I thank all of the good people who came to listen to me tonight. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
I got a lot of kudos on those videos.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just me who thought they were really cool videos. Yeah, let's see. One discussion here about most airplanes are pretty docile in a slipping stall, which I think you illustrated that a little bit. That skidding one is the one that really gets, that's the one that people normally associated with an overshot based to final turn. So talk a little bit about that, if you can.
Sure. Yeah. And again, you've probably noticed that one thing I like to do is when I see something that just doesn't seem right, I try to, hopefully involving a video, get some, get the word out of something I think is more correct. So, you know, sometimes I hear people say that you cannot spin out of a slip. Yes, you can spin out of a slip, right? So their slipping though has a lot of virtues, right? I slip at my own airport for a lot of reasons. I fly steep approaches. I'm a big steep approach person. I'm actually here today because I fly steep approaches. I lost an engine in a friend's airplane a number of years back landing in my own airport. And the only reason I'm here today is I fly steep approaches and I made the runway with ease. Because if you notice, my airport is surrounded by trees. So I slip probably just about every time I land. It's a great maneuver. Obviously, compensating for a crosswind is another reason to slip. So there are lots of good reasons to slip, but you do want to watch your angle of attack and make sure that it's not getting high because you can spin out of a slip. I suppose the good news about a slip is as you go off, since your high wing is stalling, you have more time to catch it before you're upside down. And once you're upside down, you know, it's not going to go anywhere good if you're low to the ground. A skid, there is no virtue in a skid. There is no flight situation out there where somehow a skid's your answer, right? So we should never, ever skid an airplane. But you should know that you could, you should know that you could spin out of a slip as well. So did that address that? Again, the virtue is at least you're going through wings level as you're going into the spin, but you're still going to have to push in order to stop that roll off.
Yeah, one of the things with this base to final turn thing, I mean, the typical thing is, okay, you put more left rudder in, let's say it's a left pattern you're flying, and so you overshoot the turn. So you want to hit more left rudder to kind of rudder the nose over. And then you see the ground coming up, so you pull, and okay, so you're instantly in a slip and ready, just primed for a spin. So what I've been talking about lately on this maneuver a little bit is, what's the answer? I mean, the easy answer is go around, but instead of hitting that inside rudder, bottom rudder to rudder that nose around, just keep it coordinated. Just be patient and let the airplane turn around to line up with final.
Right. Yeah. So I always say, you know, if you've overshot a little bit and it's easy to get it back, you know, you can drift back onto final. If it's any sort of an effort, take it around for, you know, an approach that compensates better for perhaps maybe you have that tailwind on base or what have you. But yeah, but there is no virtue in skidding in the pattern. Absolutely.
It looks like Mark has a question.
Yeah, great seminar. Thanks, Catherine. So my question was back at the beginning, right? And I don't know if there's a mathematical explanation, but you had the blunt tube when it was in the smoke, right? And the same thing with the trucks, right? With causing drag. It's not clear to me, right, how that actually causes drag. Is there something in the physics or the equations that kind of explains how those circular street things actually create the drag?
Separation of airflow.
Yeah. So actually, let me. Okay.
May I give a possible explanation for that? It's Paul. If you know what uniform flow looks like, sir, you have like a comb that you'd use to comb your hair, right? So all these are straight lines. Now with that uniform air is going to go over, say, a object, whether it's that ball or it's that wing. And when you get that comb on the other side, there's going to be a deficit, right? Catherine talked to that. And that deficit is your drag that, you know, drug over that object. And that deficit, your comb, imagine taking a bite out of your comb. I'm using a comb as uniform air in the beginning, and then after the object, now it has this bite out of it. And that drag, that deficit is the drag. So it's momentum loss and the like. And go ahead.
Yeah, and I
just like that visual.
Yeah. I'll add to that if you look at that, it takes a lot of energy to make that happen. That's energy that's not going to lift. So that's an inefficiency because you have all of that energy that's going to make those vortices, and it's not benefiting you.
Okay, I guess I'll have to take that on faith. Is that, yeah, it's not obvious to me, I guess, but yeah, sure. Thanks.
Other questions?
I just had a follow-up comment to the previous question the person asked about the military. The reason the F-18 has vertically outboard canted vertical stabilizers is exactly for the vortices. When they first designed the F-18, they wanted to have rudder controllability. So they designed it so that the vortexes coming off the leading edge extensions would actually hit the rudders, the vertical stabs. So that's the reason they have that. So that's the reason why it's not straight up, it's actually canted. And what happened was they were too strong. They're actually cracking the tails here at Marine Corps Station El Toro. So they put a little trapezoidal counter vortex generator, it was a Lex fence, to break up the vortices because they were actually cracking the tails. And then the Super Hornet, they replaced that with a Lex spoiler, but ultimately it ended up not being needed because the Super Hornet's a bigger airplane. They needed a larger Lex in order to get the turn rate, so generate larger vortices, and it actually moved the vortex outward. So that's the reason why the Super Hornet has a larger parabola-shaped Lex, but that's just a little bit of an update to what I said earlier.
Fascinating.
Yeah, when you're turning to final, it's safer to bank than it is to yaw. if you were going to overdo one of them, you'd be better off overbankering than
Oh.
over yawing.
Hands down. And I'm not advocating banking steeply in the pattern,
Yeah.
but a steep bank is way safer than a lack of coordination. I agree with you 100%.
If I could just for a minute here, let me throw up my screen here about the wings credit. If you don't need or care about wings credit for tonight, you don't need to do anything. But if you do, send an email to this email address and put this number, that WP number, in the comment and or the body of the email. Go ahead and take a screenshot of that if you want, or a picture or something. Fling me an email and I'll get you that credit in a couple of days. Now I'll leave it up there for a little bit while the discussion continues. Find my screens here.
So I had one question. So I've seen places where in a spin, they said if you push forward on the stick, for example, maybe like a flat spin or something. I don't know if it depends on the aerodynamics of each airplane, but it actually speeds up the spin. So anything we should be aware of, like as far as like, student pilots or, inexperienced pilots, low time pilots?
Yeah, I think you should be spring loaded to push. Probably in, what are you flying?
Just the basic training. So, 172, DA40, Piper, maybe.
Yeah, so probably the only way you're going to get into a flat spin is probably a poorly loaded airplane, right? So, so I would just make sure that you're spring loaded to push.
To that point, you've played with ailerons, left versus right in a spin. One way will speed you up, right?
Yes. So in my airplane, if you put ailerons in the direction of the spin, it will speed it up and it flattens it slightly. It's still a pretty steep spin, but it'll speed it up. Interestingly, in my airplane, you can recover using opposite aileron alone. So yeah, whereas interestingly, in a PA-28, and this was based on a dynamically scaled model that was spun next to me here at the Space Institute, at the University of Tennessee Space Institute. They had a dynamically scaled model of a Cherokee. They put it into a left spin and they gave opposite aileron. So they gave right aileron and it went flat to the point of unrecoverable no matter what they did afterward. So in my airplane, in my 152, aileron against the spin is good. In a PA-28, apparently aileron against a spin is bad. So aileron, some people think that since the wings are stalled, the ailerons don't have an effect. That is flat out false. Your ailerons can have a profound effect. And the fact is this, during certification, there's not a whole lot that the test pilots have to do with ailerons and spins. So, you're truly a test pilot if you're playing around with ailerons in your airplane. I know what they do in my airplane and I'm comfortable doing that, but I wouldn't just go spin another airplane and play around with them.
May I add, please? So I was at National Test Pilot School, and so we did 8 spins in the Chipmunk, right? And then, so the last one, we go up another 1,000 feet to 9,000 feet, and that's when we play with the ailerons. And when it sped up, it thwarted the fuel getting into the engine and shut the engine off. And then to the gentleman's point, and you answered about CG potentially, there was a J3 Cub with a heavy instructor in the back, and they got in the spin. He had to unbuckle his seat and lean over the gentleman in the front to get the CG forward to get out of the spin, FYI.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, keep flying the airplane. Do everything you can think of to get control back.
Never say die.
Right. Let's see. I don't see anything else popping in here, really. I did get a couple of questions there. Yes, for tonight, even if you did pre-register on the FAA website, that site filled up this time actually. So please send me an email anyway. Usually I try to keep notes, but I was so enthralled in the conversation tonight, I didn't want to leave it. I didn't have brain power to do that. So please send me the email, even if you did register.
Catherine, can you hear me okay? This is Jim Gandy.
Yep.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, just wanted to, from the president's chair here of Fullerton Airport Pilot Association, Mike does most of the legwork for our guest speakers, of which we're very appreciative, but it's the guest speakers that make these programs. And I'll tell you what, I see from the comments, and myself included, we have just so much enjoyed your presentation. And of course, given your expertise and knowledge, I mean, that's really meant a lot. So are you going to be bringing your Wilbur out to Fullerton Airport here pretty soon for us, or how can we get a ride in the thing?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'd probably bring the Bonanza out to California, which, by the way, is on my list. As I said, I'm from California, and I always wanted to make it out there and fly with my dad before he passed away. Unfortunately, I didn't quite make that, but I still have it on my radar to get out that way. It probably would be in Mickey before it's in Wilbur, but I've actually taken Wilbur quite a fair ways, cross country at times. So who knows? Maybe so.
Well, I'll tell you what, I myself would be very interested in some spin training, although I don't think we can do it in a bigger Cessna, but I'd sure be a lot of fun, and it would be very helpful in my position as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really proud of the training that I give, and I have a lot of fun doing that. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's I'm a flight instructor, and those of you who aren't, in case you don't know, flight instructors are required to get an endorsement before they complete their flight instructor certificate that you've received instruction on spin entry and recovery. And I've had a few people come to me over the years to get that endorsement. And I tell them, you really need to go to an expert on spins. Yes, I could do it, but you're really better off going to a school like Sunrise at Orange County or like CP Aviation at Santa Paula. These people do spins all day long. They have the airplanes for it. They really know what they're doing in spins, and you will get a real education on what these things are all about. And it's worth your while. It could save your life someday. So it's really important to do that. Plus, it's a ton of fun.
It is a gas.
I haven't heard that term in a long time.
All right. Well, that's all I have for tonight. Jim, you got anything else?
No, just once again to say thank you very much. We know you're on the right coast or over kind of towards that way, and we know it's getting late for you, and we very much appreciate you spending your time, Catherine. And we're just so appreciative. Thank you.
Hey, you bet. Yeah, thanks again for having me. Thanks for spending this time with me, and get your wings credit, because listening to me for an hour ought to be worth something. So go get your wings credit.
Yeah. So I know we've got you up past your bedtime. Is it 9:30 or is it 10:30 where you are?
9:30.
9:30.
Yeah, I am at the eastern part of the Central Time Zone.
All right. Well, thanks again, Catherine, for coming in and giving us a talk. It's really been a pleasure to work with you on this tonight, and I've really enjoyed your presentation as well. So I look forward to seeing you again sometime.
Likewise. Thank you so much.